clear as mud, Mark, because there is an almighty battle about this particular piece of legislation, with a lot of Conservative backbenchers trying to stick up for landlords, particularly buy-to-let landlords, people who've just got one or two properties, and a lot of Labour backbenchers and the Labour front bench sticking up for what you call generation rent, young people who feel that the rental market is stacked.
Which is an increasing number of people.
Which is an increasing number of people. Let's just run through some of the details here. Now, these are no-fault evictions. That is the right of landlords to evict for no reason with 2 months' notice. And the Tories are saying they will end these no-fault evictions. And this is a policy, Mark, that they first promised in their 2019 manifesto. Now, there's been a delay, and since that delay, the likes of Generation Rent and Priced Out, these campaign groups that are standing up for young renters, they say no-fault evictions in England are up 41% between April and June compared to the same period in 2022 because of this delay. And Labour fears that even if the ban does get through legislation, there will still be a delay, and I'll explain why. This is the Renters Reform Bill, Mark, and the Tories are saying today they will bring it forward for debate in Parliament. It will happen. But what Labour are saying is that a line on the face of the bill suggests it can only be enacted, it will only come into effect once ministers are satisfied that the court system is geared up enough and well-resourced enough that landlords can evict tenants, even with these no-fault evictions gone, if they need to. Because at the moment, the court system is so under-resourced and not geared up for rental disputes that it can take landlords, if tenants refuse to move out, months, even years to get rid of tenants.
The other aspect, which the newspapers have touched on, is their research has shown that 87 MPs earn income from residential property, 68 of them Conservatives. But the argument is that it would reduce the number of landlords prepared to put property onto the market and therefore lead to yet another shortage of accommodation for generation rent.
That's exactly right. This is the great conundrum. There's a conundrum with what we call rent controls. Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, wants rent controls in London. That means that rents can only go up to a certain level dictated by government. And again, a lot of landlords will say, look, if you don't let me set the rent that I can get in the open market, then I'm just going to sell my property, and the property will just be bought by an owner-occupier. And it won't be there for the 20% of the population which now live in rental accommodation. This really goes to the heart of the kind of ideological divide between the Tories and Labour. The Tories will say they are sticking up for private sector landlords, not big institutions, not rapacious companies, but couples who haven't been saving in a pension because returns have been terrible for the last 15 or 20 years, but maybe they've moved house, but they've kept their existing house, and so they've got one or two properties. They're not big landlords, and when they need their own property back, maybe their kids want to live in it, or they want to sell it because a relative's sick or something like that. They need to be able to free up that property, Tories would say, when they need to free it up.
But the other interesting thing is it's showing that maybe housing is really lining up to be a key issue for the general election. And it was touched on by Labour in their conference, less so by the Conservatives. But we're talking about now issues not just of, can you afford your mortgage? Is there enough housing stock? But now, can you even rent? It's coming together in a pretty sort of powerful bubble, isn't it?
I think you're exactly right. I was too early to this. I thought housing would be the really big issue of the 2019 general election, because I thought by then Brexit would be done. That's why I wrote a book called Home Truths, to coincide with that general election. But it seems to me, I agree with you, the 2023/2024 election, we're expecting an election either next spring or next...
Or maybe a bit later now.
Or maybe next autumn. Hopefully the Tories want interest rates to start coming down before they go to the country, if you like. I think you could be right. It wasn't that Starmer just touched on housing in his conference speech at in Liverpool. It was actually the centre of his conference speech. And Sunak didn't mention housing at all.
I mean,
you and I were talking about social housing last week. Again, that's really coming to the fore. A lot of lower income households, they want some action on social housing. housing. And then, of course, there are 20% of the population that rents, but overwhelmingly, they are between 25 and 34. Yeah. Those swing voters trying to start a family. Yeah. They watch their mum and dad were able to buy a house. They can't buy a house. They will vote pretty much for anyone that says the right thing when it comes to helping renters to get on the property ladder and own their own homes.
Yeah, and of course they are, you know, the generations that come through that want to aspire to stuff. And I thought it was quite interesting, you know, Starmer went the whole mile, didn't he, by saying about Labour new towns, which, you know, we saw in the 60s. Crawley and Hemel Hempstead, Stevenage, Milton Keynes was the big example here.
Corby, parts of Peterborough. Yeah. Look, we haven't built... I'm 54. I look younger, I know, but anyway, no comment. I'm 54. We haven't built a new town in this country in my lifetime. The last one was Milton Keynes, which kind of opened in 1967, 2 years before I was born.
And then took 5 years to get to around the roundabouts.
Indeed, for the trees to grow. But don't knock Milton Keynes. It's one of the happiest places in Britain, surveys show. Huge entrepreneurship. A lot of my cousins moved there from rough parts of London.
Yeah. Jackie Stewart started his Grand Prix team
back in the 70s. People that live in new towns like new towns. You know, the media might be a bit sniffy about them, but they are absolutely vital for aspiration, for the British dream. But we've now got a situation where we haven't had a new town in over 50 years, and during my lifetime, the population's increased by 15 or 20 million. That's why there's so much pressure on housing.
But is there a huge problem for all MPs with all these things? Because, of course, when they come to being a constituency MP, inevitably is the NIMBY factor saying, we don't want this big market town here, we don't want this housing estate here, we don't want this development here. It's a really tough call for them.
It is, and Labour, to their credit, are trying to address those problems because they're looking at a policy that I've talked about a lot over the years called land value capture. So when you give agricultural land planning permission for homes, the value of that land goes to the moon. It goes up 200 or 300 times in many parts of the UK. And then you can then use that increase in value if you split it between the developers / landowners and the local authorities. The local authorities can use that value to build schools, to build hospitals, to build bypasses.
Because it's the infrastructure that has to go with it.
So local people may feel, well, look, if we get all this new infrastructure, after the hassle of the build, the value of my house might go up.
Yeah, but
there won't be extra pressure on infrastructure. There'll be more infrastructure, more public services. So actually, I want this.
Yeah, and that's always been the criticism. Look, our waiting lists at the GP surgery are long enough as it
Land value capture can totally rebalance the fraught local politics of planning. International experience shows that.
Right.
Labour examining that. It's time the Tories, in my view, do too.
I was going to say, I think Michael Gove's got quite a lot in his intro this afternoon. So, Liam, thanks for taking us through that.